A few years ago, I came up with an idea to make pants on the Addie King and the small Addie. And I was going to try and combine them and make them awesome. And I had this idea in my head. And when it finally came to putting the legs together with the top part of the pants, something went wrong. I tried to graph them. This was my first attempt. As you can see, it just left gaping holes. It looked horrible. So I Googled some YouTube videos on grafting and I came up with this, but it still was bad and wasn't looking right. I wanted it to be seamless and it just was a fail. Well, after years and years of thinking about it, I finally had an epiphany on how to make a no seam pant on the Addie.
Okay, so to start off, you're going to cast on your waste yarn, which is the opposite color of your working yarn, so you can see your stitches more clearly. You can do 5, 6, 7, 8 rows, it doesn't matter, whatever you're comfortable with. And then you're going to run your main color, and to start off with, we are going to make the waistband. So in order to do this, I'm going to knit about 20 rows, and then I'm going to fold it over on itself and knit it closed to create a waistband. So this will all depend on what size pants you're making, so you're going to have to play around with the pattern. But for me, I'm going to be doing 20 rows. Now that I've knit my 20 rows for the waistband, here I'm going to join the bottom to my fresh row, in order to close this off, and it's going to form the waistband. So in order to do that, you take your tail from the beginning and your first black needle where you start, you knit that down, and as you can see every stitch progressively from the beginning, and you're just going to grab them and put them back on the loop. Take the loop and put it on the needle. So for every one, I'm going to go like that, and then you just knit it down. I'll zoom in so you can see closer. Okay, so here's up a close-up. This is my current working yarn. These are my needles where I'm currently making the 21st row. This is my stitches from the very first row I did of my working yarn. And that's why having the waste yarn helps, because you can clearly see where each stitch is that we need to grab. You can grab it and use a needle like this. You can use a crochet hook. You can use a loom hook. Whatever works for you. Just make sure that your working yarn gets in and knits. So when you put this on, you're going to end up having 2 loops on one needle. 1, 2. And then your working yarn is going to go through right here and knit those 2 together. And what that's going to do is create a closure. So go ahead and finish knitting all the loops and I'll meet you back. Okay, so once you finish that up, I just do one more round just to make sure everything's secure and I don't count it in my pattern. So I'm just going to go through and make sure all of the double stitches are pushed down and they all get knit. Alright, so as you can see, this peach is my waste yarn, and here is the band of our waist that got started. From here, you're going to have to decide how big you want to make it. So here's an example so you can see visually. These are my daughter's shorts, and here's the part we just made, the waistband, and then we need to make this section because the legs we're going to do on the small Addie. So I'm going to measure and find out from the waistband, from the bottom of the waistband, about how much I need. And then I can take my yarn and see about how many stitches equals an inch. And for me, looks like it's about 6. So for every inch I need, I'm going to do 6 stitches. So here's where you're going to go ahead and figure out how much you need and knit up what you need. Okay, so once you have all the rows knitted that you need, you're going to want to not cut your working yarn. You are going to put it in the center. It'll make this part a little easier because we're actually going to cast off with waste yarn, but we're going to be doing it by knitting a few more rows of the waste yarn. So put your waste yarn in, and then do about 5, 6, 7 rows of it, whatever you're comfortable with. And this is going to be a key piece to making a seamless connection with making the legs. From here you can either choose to just drop this off the needles, because you're going to cut your waste yarn, or you can, that's if you're brave, or if you're not comfortable, you can always cut another section of waste yarn and pick it up like you would a normal cast off. And this will hold your waste yarn stitches in place if you're not brave enough to wing it without doing this. Okay, so here's what we have. We have our waistband and then our section, and now we're going to add legs, and they're going to be seamless. So this was our beginning with our first waste yarn. If it's too bulky and it's annoying you, I guess you could cut it off now, but I'm just going to leave it until I finish up this project, and I'll do it at the end. We still are attached to our working yarn. We never cut it. And here is our second waste yarn that we added at the bottom, and then we did just a simple cast off just to hold the waste yarn stitches from unraveling. You don't have to do that, but you can. So now here's where it gets a little tiny bit tricky / complicated, but it's not hard at all. The large Addie, the king size, has 46 needles. The small has 22. So if you think about it, we can do 22 needles on the small Addie for one leg, 22 needles on the other leg, and that'll leave us with 44, giving us 2 remaining stitches, which we will turn into the crotch area, which you can crochet or knit into whatever design you want for the crotch. So in order to make this work, we're going to attach 22 of these stitches on to the Addie in order to have a continuous knitted leg. So what I did was I put little ties on my stitches, my 2 stitches that I will not be knitting. Okay, so this was the one we left off at before we started the waste yarn. So this is the one the working yarn is attached to. So I just took another color and tied it to that stitch. As you can see, if I pull it, it pulls the working yarn. Okay, so from there I counted 22 stitches. So right here where the working yarn starts, that's one stitch. So I counted 22, and then once I got to 22, I tied off the 23rd one. So this one was 22, and this would have been 23. So I tied off 23, and then from here I started over with the count and counted 22 just to make sure I had it correct and it was equally divided. And this stitch right here is 22. This would have been 23, but we already started with this one. This is the first one. So this is what it'll look like. You can see it'll be equally divided in half. So this will be one leg, this will be one leg, and where these two white stitch holders are will be the crotch. Now we're going to put one section on the small Addy. So we're going to pick up these stitches right here, these ones, and put them back on the needles, but on the small Addy. Okay, I'm going to do this from around the camera so I can give you a good angle, so if I bump it, I'm sorry. So basically, we're going to take our knitting just like it came out of the king and push it down in. So this is our waistband. We're going to push it in. It's going to be a little bit tight just because it was made on the king and now it's on the small. But we're going to find our first stitch. Remember our working yarn we left. We're going to pick up, remember we tied it off, so we're going to actually pick up the next stitch, the stitch that we left the waist yarn at. So we just pick that up. Oh, make sure it's on the first black needle. So pick that up and put it on the first black needle. And from there you're just going to continue to follow the pattern. Push all this waist yarn string in so it's not in the way. And you just crank it. Continue placing the yarn on. So the only purpose the waist yarn had at the end of the garment that we made on the king was right here, so we could see our stitches and pick them right back up. So we'll be knitting them right where they left off, which will leave things seamless. Okay, so as you can see, we reached our black needle again, and here's our white tie-off. So we do not do anything else than grab our working yarn and put it through. Don't knit these white ones. You want to start knitting your first row back at the black. You may have to push down as you go to secure the stitches so they don't give you a tuck stitch. So go ahead and knit this. And as you can see, it's going to fall right back into place. See, just like that. So now how many rows you do depends on how long you need the leg to be. So again, you're going to measure your pants or a guide, whatever you have available, and you're going to measure how long. You can make it into shorts, you can make it into capris, you can make it into pants, whatever you want. You just measure how long you need, how many stitches that equals, and then knit it up. So I'm going to go ahead and calculate mine, and then I will be back with my leg knitted. Okay, so once you knit how long you want the leg to be, you can cast off, but you're going to probably want to cast off with waist yarn by knitting a few rows of it first. That way you can finish it with a nice edge, like a crochet edge or hand knit some kind of nice hem to it. So don't cut your working yarn off so close. You're going to want to save a chunk of it so you'll be able to continue without any knots and make a fancy ending to it. So I'm just going to finish this up with some waste yarn. I'm going to cast on, just put it through the carriage, and I'm just going to knit a couple rows of the waste yarn to get it off. So I'm actually not going to run a line through it. I'm just going to cut it here and then just drop it off. Okay. So here, once we untangle it, you will see we have a leg. And once we cut this off, after we finish the second leg, there will be no seam, no grafting needed, nothing. At the bottom, again, we left the extra working yarn, so you can crochet this or hand knit it and make a fancy hem at the bottom. So you can see it's coming along. So basically what we just did to this leg, we're going to repeat on this side. So as you can see, this is where we stopped the stitches here. These were our two, our first and our 23rd. Those are our two stitches that we will use for the crotch. We're basically going to connect this leg on. So here we do not have the working yarn anymore, so there will be a connection point where we will have a tail, but you can make that tail long enough, if you do it right, that you can use it to connect this crotch. Okay, so again, we're gonna shove this project in. We don't have to worry about finagling anything because we have the black needle. Here's our tied off one. Let me see if I can get this closer. Okay, here's a nice close-up. So we're gonna take not this stitch, this is the one we're doing for our crotch, and we got it tied off. We're going to take the next one, we're going to put it on our needles. I'm just going to go all the way around, make sure not to miss one. You want them to be evenly on there. You don't want to put the 10th stitch on the 8th needle, because then you'll end up with extras and it'll be wonky. All this little extra stuff. Push it down. It's just going to be in our way. So as you can see, we're back to our white marker. This is the other side. So we're just going to tuck it. We have 2 stitches left to pick up. All right. And get to our black needle. Okay. Oops. We don't want this to be down here yet. It'll get pushed off. There. Okay. So, give yourself a nice chunk of working yarn. Shove it in the middle. That way you can do your crotch without having to tie another knot. And then put it through your carriage. Make sure it goes under your black needle. And now you're just going to knit as many rows as you need for your leg. The same equal amount that you did on the other side. So once you finish the second leg, go ahead and cast on or run your waste yarn. And don't forget, don't cut this tail, because you'll keep it connected to your working yarn, so then you can finish off the bottom cuff of your pant leg without having to knot. So I'll meet you back here when we finish. The second leg I actually took off using a regular cast off method where you just run one string through each stitch and pick them up. You can do it either way. You can do it with waste yarn, or you can just run whatever you're comfortable with is how it'll go for you. Here I want to show you that you just pick it up as you go, and you can crochet a simple bind off on the hem of the pant leg by just doing a single crochet if you want to keep it simple, or you can make it fancy however you would like. No matter what you do, either way, you're going to do it to both legs. So just finish off each cuff, and then you can cut off the waste yarn. Okay, so once you do that, you can finish off your cuffs, and then you cut your waste yarn if you had any. Pull it out. And then you go ahead and weave your ends. Then the legs are done. So now we come up here, and since we already secured our 2 loose stitches with these extra little stitch markers, we can cut this off and not worry about losing those 2 stitches. So we can go ahead, pull this out. And as you can see, there is no noticeable line or grafting. I'm going to zoom in. See, you can see very closely that there's nothing. And the only thing we have left to do right here is to tie up the crotch. We have 2 loose stitches, and we have our working yarn that we saved. See? And you can stitch close the crotch however you feel comfortable. And then to finish this part off, you're going to go ahead and cut this waste yarn off. And you have a waistband. Now you'll weave in your end right here, and then you have the option of adding, I guess you could keep it like it is. Sorry about that, guys. I got a phone call from my dad. When your dad calls, you gotta answer it. So back to what I was saying, you can keep the top like it is, or you can add elastic, or you can run some yarn or ribbon, whatever you would like to make it a little tighter if you'd like.